The Lovely Bones by Alice Sebold. Sebold? Sebold? Sorry if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. I think I'm going to go with Sebold. Alice Sebold. Yeah, I wanted to read this book for a long time. I kind of mentioned the reasons for that in my book haul that I did recently, so I will leave the links to that below. But basically, I bought this it must have been about a fortnight ago now, and I pretty much put that to the top of my TBR pile. I really wanted to read this for a very long time. And so I think I went in with quite high expectations, and I think that ruined the book for me slightly. I also went in with preconceived ideas about what sort of style and genre it was going to be, and it did not match these preconceived ideas, and therefore it was a slight disappointment for me. I can understand why it gets the acclaim it does. I do think it was very well written, and it was a very original idea, but obviously this is going to come from a very sort of biased view, this review of what I thought I was going to get from this book and how it didn't deliver. Not that I will try to also review the book objectively as well, as in the actual book standalone for the genre it is, but I thought it was going to be something a little bit different. Basically, to give a plot synopsis of The Lovely Bones, in case anybody does not know what this book is about, it is about a 14-year-old girl in the early 70s who is raped and murdered by one of her neighbours, and then the whole book is told from her perspective, from heaven, looking down to earth, watching both her family and how they sort of grow up and adjust to life without her, her sort of friends and first love and how they sort of evolve with her loss, and then her killer, and she watches him and how he gets away with it, for seemingly how he's getting away with it and things like that, and it sort of goes on like that. I'm not going to say how the book ends because that will be a spoiler, but he appears at the beginning but nobody's sort of catching him, and so you have kind of that, but you know very early on who the killer is. It's basically told to you within the first chapter, so it's nothing's that surprising or anything like that. And you kind of, you know where you stand straight away. You know basically she's dead. It starts like that. So that wasn't a spoiler, I promise. So this then goes on from that, and it's just her perspective of like heaven and things. And I do love the way that heaven is done, how it's portrayed as this place where everyone has their own heaven, and then if your heaven matches closely with someone else's heaven, you will see them in your heaven at some parts, and other parts they might not be there. And then once you go through this sort of stage of heaven, which is kind of like purgatory, you then go on to a higher state of heaven, but only once you've kind of let go of earth and the people living there, the people you've left behind. And so it's kind of her journey from getting from this heaven to the next heaven, and her also adjusting to the loss of the people that are still living and the people she can't see anymore. So it balances out, and it's really interestingly done. And it's really nice to see how sort of death and life interlink so seamlessly as it does, really. And it kind of tries to, I guess, answer questions like what happens after we die, and deals with a lot of different types of grief. And it is really interestingly done and really well portrayed. My issue with it is that I thought it was going to be more of a thriller and less of a sort of human interest story. I do like human interest stories, but I don't tend to read a lot of them. I do think they're interesting, but I kind of need something else going along the side of them. So reading about people dealing with grief, they can't just be dealing with grief for me. It's got some, I don't know, I just don't find those stories as interesting. And I picked this up expecting a lot more of a thriller and sort of a mystery into who killed her, not from our point of view, but them trying to solve it a lot more focused around the investigation, and a lot less focusing on how people are dealing with loss. So it was a very different sort of book to what I was expecting, and therefore a disappointment, because I really do like the thriller genre, and so I was really excited to read that sort of book, especially as it's quite a I don't know, taboo, am I thinking the word taboo the right word I want to use? It's quite a disturbing crime, I guess. This guy is a notorious serial killer and rapist of young women to little girls, really. I think he says his youngest victim is 6, and his oldest was actually a woman in her early 40s, late 30s. So he kind of ranged completely, but he's a really disgusting character, and I wanted to know more about the sort of his way of thinking and the psychology behind that, I guess, and the thrill, the chase of trying to catch him and solve the murders and the case and the mysteries and how they go into link, which there wasn't a lot of, which for me was a shame. But I guess if you're not really into the thriller genre, then it won't make a big deal to you. Or if you like standalone human interest stories, because it was very that way inclined. But I still think I can understand why it gets the acclaim it does. It is still beautifully written, and it's such a unique idea, and it's not necessarily the idea of dealing with grief, but just the way she presents it, like the fact that it's told from Susie Salmon's point of view, who's the girl who died, and the idea of heaven and how that's portrayed and things. It's very interesting, and I do think it's nice the sort of way she's watching her family grow up, especially like her siblings and things, and how her death has impacted them, and the impact had on those left behind. Like, I do think she really captures it well, for what I can imagine what it's like to lose someone in the family, like immediate family, the way her parents respond, her grandmother responds, and her siblings respond, especially her sister, who has a real struggle adjusting, because not only she got to deal with the loss of it, but everyone's kind of seeing her dead sister in her. She kind of becomes known as the dead sister's girl, and so it's very interestingly done. I did think it was well done. I did enjoy reading it, but it was a disappointment to me, which is a shame. I think if I went in with a different sort of viewpoint and expectations, maybe it would have been better. I'm not sure. So that's kind of this. I think if you're as I said, into human interest stories, and you like reading about sort of extreme emotions and grief, really, I guess this is quite a good book. I say quite a good book, it's a very good book for you. If you're more wanting to read about the thriller and the mystery, I think there's probably better ones out there, because it doesn't really cover that at all. And that's why, to me, it was a disappointment. And I'm only going to give it a... I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. Because of how well it's done. And I'm trying to look at it slightly more objectively as an actual book. I think it deserves a 7 out of 10, possibly higher. But so I'm only going to give it a 7 out of 10. I did enjoy reading it, but I'm not sure I'm going to pick it up again for a second read. But yeah, that's what I thought of The Lovely Bones. It was still better than the film. I'll give you that.